Hey fam. Over the pandemic, I got into a number of franchises I hadn't really explored previously, like Dragon Quest and Shin Megami Tensei, but I also got back into a series that I hadn't explored in an unironic fashion since elementary school, Yu-Gi-Oh! My memories of the show and card game remain fairly strong over the years, thanks in no small part to a combination of general nostalgia and the continued output of episodes of Little Karibo's now legendary parody, Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged Series. But I was still very much a Yugi boomer who only had any real attachment to the original series, and hadn't even explored the game as far as GX's introduction of modern deck archetypes, let alone any of the newer special summoning mechanics. But with that sudden influx of free time and a general hankering for deck-building video games in general, I decided on a whim to try and get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! By way of a few older, single-player-oriented titles. While the TCG itself is obviously oriented towards a PvP format, I have kind of a known hatred for modern meta in just about everything. See my Pokemon video if you don't know what I'm talking about, link below. And I really wanted something with a robust and well-balanced single-player experience to ease me back into the card game itself, and allow me to experiment and feel smart without needing to do hardcore research just to get started. Before we get into that, however, I just want to take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, FiGGYZ. FiGGYZ are a brand new type of magnetic collectible figure depicting characters across a broad variety of game and anime franchises in a distinctly stylized but still appealingly uniform pixel art style. The first wave has just launched, featuring franchises including Yu-Gi-Oh!, Banjo-Kazooie, and Mega Man X, but many more are yet to come, and I can't wait for you to see some of what I've seen so far. FiGGYZ are built with premium materials, with each one having a solid weight and feel to them. Each one also comes bundled with reversible metal backgrounds for 2 display styles in one, a clean swappable display base, a wall-mounted magnet which allows them to be mounted to other surfaces with their backdrops, and the chance for a randomly inserted gold, silver, or bronze hidden chase variant. Every component, from FiGGYZ to backdrops, is modular and swappable as well. On top of all that, each FiGGYZ comes with a QR code which allows collectors to track their growing collection on the FiGGYZ app, which will be rolling out soon. This app will also serve as a hub for the FiGGYZverse, coming later this year with even more features. And at only $14.99 SRP, FiGGYZ offer an incredible value, containing not only the figures themselves, but the reversible art backgrounds, digital tracking, and hidden chase elements all included in the package. So, if you'd like to get in on the action and help support the channel, use the promo code in the description to get 5% off all orders over $50. Once again, big thanks to FiGGYZ for partnering with the channel. Ultimately, I decided to start with Nightmare Troubadour, which, from my understanding, is one of the final original Duel Monsters era games. I selected it because it not only had the majority of the notable cards from my era of the anime, and adapted the fan-favorite Battle City arc, but also because I saw that it did something very fun, which the vast majority of Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games seem to forego. It actually provided little models, sprites, and in some cases animations for every single monster card featured in the game. It's pretty simplistic, and it isn't much, but this little bit of effort into the visuals of the duels goes a long way for me, as I always felt that the biggest thing missing from most of the duel simulator-style games was the show's pageantry when it comes to monster combat. While the video games have the obvious benefit of allowing you to fully enjoy the TCG without needing to invest hundreds or even thousands of dollars into the actual cardboard, as a kid I often wondered what the point even was if I couldn't see my dark magician pop out of his card and blast something. Nightmare Troubadour gave me access to the full suite of both cards and characters that I had any sort of nostalgia for, and allowed me to rediscover the TCG itself on my own terms, by way of an adventure throughout which I built a collection of different and unique decks, as I continuously discovered and cracked open new booster packs, and even participated in duel puzzles at Grandpa's shop just to keep things fresh. In the end, I had a thoroughly enjoyable time with Troubadour, so much so that I was still hungry for more by the time I had wrapped up the campaign and dabbled in the postgame. But I also realized that when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular, my attachment to certain cards is deeply intertwined with my attachment to the characters who wield them, and I really do enjoy getting swept up in the pageantry of the anime's at times sweeping summoning and combat choreography during the duels. In other words, my affection for the show has a symbiotic relationship with my affection for the games, and to even know which cards and deck themes I'd want to tool around with in any post-Duel Monsters era titles, I would have to start exploring the anime beyond the original series. So that's exactly what I did. Now, I've discovered that I'm kind of a huge basic when it comes to determining which deck archetypes I'm most interested in running, but sue me, I like what I like. Since childhood, my absolute favorite monster cards were always the ones featured in Yugi's deck, the Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl in particular, but I also found myself craving the power of Kaiba's Blue Eyes White Dragons and Joey's Red Eyes and Time Wizard and so forth. And so, while exploring GX, I quickly fell in love with Jaden's Elemental Heroes and Zane's Cyber Dragons, which were the two deck archetypes I was most eager to build as soon as I started up Spirit Caller, the DS's first GX-era entry, if I'm not mistaken. And as with Nightmare Troubadour, this single-player-driven experience gave me an outlet to just have fun running my favorite anime protagonist decks without needing to worry about viability within the modern meta. But it also allowed me to start slowly growing accustomed to the concept of modern deck archetypes, which were arguably GX's biggest lasting contribution to the TCG, since every series which followed it would be known for introducing a new form of summoning. In other words, the existence of a plethora of options for GX-era video games allowed me to ease myself into modern Yu-Gi-Oh! At my own pace, which was hugely important for a Yu-Gi boomer like myself, who was still weirdly intimidated by the idea of synchro summoning, and thought XYZ Summoning was pronounced XYZ Summoning. By the time I had wrapped up with Spirit Caller, though, I was in full-blown Yu-Gi-Oh! Nerd mode, and was actually excited to start exploring these new summoning types by way of this synergistic anime game combination experience I had crafted for myself, as Konami intended. And what I discovered during this time was something that I think every Yu-Gi boomer like myself who's been too intimidated by the new mechanics to get back into the modern game should hear. These new summoning mechanics aren't half as complicated or intimidating as they look. In fact, the first two in particular, Synchro and XYZ Summoning, are basically just a more flexible twist on fusion summoning. Synchro monsters just require one of their ingredients to be a monster with the tuner property, which is just a fancy way of saying they essentially have polymerization built into them, so you don't need to run it in your deck. And then the other ingredients can be basically anything, just like with ritual summons. And XYZ Summoning quickly became my favorite summoning mechanic in the whole game because it is so stupidly flexible that many of the XYZ monsters themselves can accept almost anything as their fusion ingredients, and again, don't require a polymerization or a ritual card. And the fact that they live in the extra deck means you can practically splash a couple of XYZ monsters into almost anything you're running just to have the option. It's insane. Like, as long as you're not playing in the competitive meta, you could basically just throw the Utopia archetype into a 4-star monster-centric GOAT format deck, and all it would do is add options without costing you anything. Anyway, around the time I hit the 5Ds era games, I began running into a fairly hefty issue with the tie-in video games' fundamental designs. As the need for cohesive deck archetypes became more and more mandatory, with Duel Monsters era hodgepodge decks becoming completely unviable even outside of a meta-centric environment, the shitty starter decks just were not cutting the chut, especially with even the earliest NPCs running cohesive archetypes. And I basically needed to start using cheat codes to fill out my card library if I was going to have any sort of fun with them. But as soon as I did, the good times with Yusei's Junk Warrior and Stardust Dragon started rolling in. And then I got to Zexal. The anime for this era of the TCG has a really wonky reputation from what I tend to see online, in that there's a huge divide in opinions about it. In particular, it seems like the people who've actually seen it tend to really like it, but many fans don't even want to give it a chance because the protagonist Yuma is swimming in cringy catchphrases, and the character designs are absolutely terrible. Like, to this day, among the worst in the series multiverse. But you know what? I'm in the camp that ended up loving it. Don't get me wrong, Zexal is weird as shit, and somehow found ways to be even more unhinged than 5Ds, which had already jumped the shark with its signature card games on motorcycles concept. And to enjoy any of these shows, you need to be able to just accept the absurdity of an entire society's culture being built around a children's card game as a prerequisite to the drama and the stakes. But Zexal did feature a significant jump in general animation quality for the franchise, and as I stated earlier, XYZ Summoning quickly became my favorite special summoning mechanic in the entire TCG. The show's central premise is actually really cool too, if again, totally ridiculous. Going into significant detail here would be outside the scope of this video, but it's kind of like a mixture between the original series, Monster of the Week and MacGuffin Collection Quest, and the plot of the original Mega Man Star Force game. It's absolutely off-the-walls bonkers, but it's such a fun watch. I also find it kind of ironic that Yugi had a tendency to refer to the Dark Magician as his good friend, despite it just being a card for all intents and purposes, prior to the retcons of the Millennium World, but Yuma's signature ace monster, Utopia, actually feels like a genuine member of the team, the way the show is written, and yet rarely seems to receive such affectionate lip service from its owner. Regardless, my affection for both the anime and the XYZ mechanic itself have actually led to Zexal producing some of my favorite deck archetypes and playstyles in the entire franchise, with Yuma's Onomats and Utopia just barely falling below Yugi's iconic Hodgepodge and Magician archetypes, and Kite's Galaxy Eyes actually supplanting Kaiba's far more iconic Blue Eyes for me personally. Synchro and XYZ era Yu-Gi-Oh! Is definitely a completely different beast from the original format, but I've come to love both eras equally in different ways. Original Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a more methodical, slower-paced, and purer TCG experience, where decks needed to be balanced much more carefully, because balancing powerful monsters with the ability to actually summon them was a much more precarious affair. In OG, or GOAT, or whatever you want to call it, the game was built around summoning and protecting weaker monsters in order to get to stronger monsters over the course of a few turns, eccentricities of the meta notwithstanding, and the quote-unquote heart of the cards was a much bigger factor because most ace monsters lived in the main deck, were much more prone to bricking in general, and couldn't simply be searched out through various special means. In Synchro and XYZ era Yu-Gi-Oh! However, the game is much faster paced, and built around getting ace monsters onto the board within a single turn, with most of the weaker monsters in a deck being designed from the ground up as gimmicky fusion fodder with insanely pitiful combat stats meant to just flood the board and then be sacrificed instantly in just about all situations, because the ace monsters they facilitate live in the extra deck and therefore don't need to wait to be drawn. As a player, this leads me to feel less attached to my support monsters than in original Yu-Gi-Oh!, but more attached to my ace monsters, which is just kind of an interesting dynamic to me. Again, I really like both formats in different ways. Anyway, that tangent aside, my only real issue with the Zexal-era games is that we barely received any at all. The only direct tie-in with the show was World Duel Carnival, which we received a somewhat neutered version of in the West, but I'm still grateful got localized at all, so I could comfortably roleplay Yuma, Shark, and Kite's decks, as well as mess around with some number card-centric toolbox deck designs, which again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should totally watch Zexal, that shit fucking slaps! But I do want to give special mention to the fan translation patch for a little-known 3DS title called Saikyo Card Battle, which quickly became a personal top 3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Game for me personally, although I doubt most other fans would hold the same appreciation for it that I do. Honestly, I may want to do an entire video just dedicated to it at some point in the future, but in a nutshell, Saikyo Card Battle's claim to fame, at least the way I see it, is that it's a post-XYZ, mostly pre-Pendulum era title with by far the best visual presentation for the duels of literally every Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game ever produced, and the fact that it was free in Japan while the West never even received it should be a war crime. Now, Saikyo Card Battle follows the speed duel format, which features the same core rules but with a few alterations. Speed duels are distinct from rush and turbo duels, which I am not going to go into. But basically, they remove main phase 2, reduce the total number of monster and magic card zones from 5 to 3, have the starting player life points from 8,000 down to 4,000, and have the main deck size from the minimum of 40 to a mandatory and precise 20. Right off the bat, this probably won't be to a lot of players' tastes, although I will say that there is some serious novelty in having a 20-card deck. They are insanely consistent to an almost laughable degree. The aspect of design that will bother far more people, though, I think, is the fact that all the way up until the post-game, you can only play with fixed, pre-made structure decks, which you cannot edit card by card at all. There are plenty of these decks. Each one can be upgraded from level 1 to level 3, and the opponent NPCs abide by these same restrictions, so the game is sort of balanced around it, but I wouldn't blame anyone who found this concept to be a deal breaker. That said, I do think you'd be missing out. There are tons of Duel Monsters era guest characters, as well as simple tutorials introducing Synchro and XYZ Summoning to satisfy the Yugi Boomer crowd. The actual card count of existing monster cards is lower than in most other Duel Simulator-style entries, but this is only because every single monster card in Saikyo Card Battle is fully modeled and animated in gorgeous detail by the standards of the hardware. The Dark Magician Girl has basically never looked this good in a video game, even after all these years, and my boy Utopia looks like an absolute unit on the battlefield. The translation itself is a bit colorful at times, but this mostly applies to the character dialogue, as the menus and card descriptions are rock solid, making the game completely approachable to interface with. Now, as I started to approach the era of Arc V and Vrains, my options for video games started to thin out considerably, which was a big part of the impetus for this video. Fortunately, I was still able to dabble with them considerably through Legacy of the Duelist Link Evolution, which clearly didn't have much of a budget, but I do think has the potential to be the de facto ultimate anime tie-in experience, depending on your expectations. Legacy of the Duelist's claim to fame is its status as a duel simulator, which takes the player through an abridged version of Duel Monsters all the way through the beginning of Vrains, while offering free, traditional deck building, and more or less the full roster of worthwhile existing cards up until the point of its original release. My personal favorite thing about it, though, is something that most fans and reviewers seem to dismiss as a frustrating and worthless feature from what I tend to see in full reviews of it. Legacy of the Duelist allows players to choose between a story deck and their own custom deck for every single duel in the story mode, and after completing each duel, you can play its reverse, commandeering the character who was originally the opponent and taking on the character you originally played as. These story decks are often maligned for being gimmicky, poorly balanced, and hard to use effectively, but while I 100% agree with that statement, I honestly love the novelty of being able to just freely roleplay the character as their deck was in that specific episode and duel, especially for the original series, where Yugi basically debuts a new ace monster every other day, even if it inevitably takes me a few tries to win this way. Now, I haven't really checked out Sevens and Rush duels yet, so I'm going to skip that era for today, but I do want to address the twin elephants in the room: Duel Links and Master Duel. For those unfamiliar with them, these are the two titles which currently have the most active player bases and still receive active support and updates from Konami. For those familiar with them, I think it's fairly obvious why they weren't really central to my discussion today. Both of these titles are freemium desktop and mobile games, and Master Duel in particular seems to be the go-to place for a modern PvP experience. Having checked out Master Duel, I think it's a great platform that serves its intended function well. But plot twist, as someone who actually checked it out before doubling back to Nightmare Troubadour to begin my journey in earnest, I didn't think it was a fantastic platform for getting older fans like myself back into the game. While it has plenty of tutorials and some nice structure deck options for Yugi boomers like myself, I found the fact that it has no real single-player component to be a fairly large detriment to its effectiveness as a tool for teaching and training budding duelists in a fun and organic way. As a pure PvP machine, Master Duel serves its intended purpose very well, but the PvP arena doesn't exactly have much of an organic difficulty curve. It is a vicious and destructive minefield, which is not at all conducive to fostering the growth and enjoyment of new players. Like, you don't just throw a new swimmer in with the sharks. It makes no sense. Duel Links appears to fare better in the single-player department from what I've seen, and could actually be an excellent jumping-on point for all I know, but in truth, I've spent very little time with it. The reasons for this are silly and annoying, but it is what it is. As a mobile game, I feel compelled to engage with it on the go, but as a freemium game receiving constant updates, it is an extremely large file that is constantly getting larger, and I found that it drained the shit out of my phone's battery and made it quickly overheat whenever I booted it up. Even if I wanted to play it on desktop, though, I have a Mac, and it does not run on Mac, apparently. I do want to check it out properly at some point, if I can, but in the meantime, I just can't speak to its quality as a single-player experience. Soundtrack fucking slaps, though. You've been listening to it for a significant portion of this video. But with all that out of the way, I think it's about time I wrapped back around to my original thesis. Yu-Gi-Oh! Just sort of needs more single-player-oriented games again. They provide a valuable service to a niche that I don't even think is necessarily that small, offering a fun, satisfying, and comfortable experience to both new players as well as those returning to the TCG after an overly lengthy hiatus. They provide an outlet to just have some fun with a rogue deck build, or roleplay your favorite character's deck without having your teeth kicked in by the meta. I massively appreciated the recent release of the Early Days collection, and I hope there's more to come, especially a compilation of the weird console spin-off titles like War of the Roses and Falsebound Kingdom, but for anything beyond Duel Monsters era Yu-Gi-Oh! On modern consoles, the only easily accessible way to, say, get my Decode Talker freak on in a controlled environment is through Legacy of the Duelist. Unfortunately, this is just sort of one of those first-world problems with a very simple solution that simply will not happen in all likelihood, but I just felt like venting about it for a bit. I had a great time with my little Yu-Gi-Oh! Marathon, rediscovering and falling in love with an old favorite all over again. I even found some new favorite deck aces, which I never dreamed could come anywhere near my love for Yugi's iconic stable of monsters, but here we are. I think a more accessible way for the masses to engage in that would do the franchise some good, but hey, there's always the high seas, am I right, fellas? Thanks for watching. And another big thanks to FiGGYZ for partnering with the channel. Remember to use the promo code in the description with your order if you'd like to support the channel while receiving a cool 5% discount on orders over $50. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you back here soon. Peace out.